Good morning, everybody. This is Pastor Rex, and today I want us to talk about something a little different from yesterday, still in the same category about thinking. But yesterday we talked about the disease of anger that can kind of stop us from thinking. Today I want us to think about a danger that can also begin to block any real thinking in our lives. Now, that danger is really the danger of social pressure. You know, one of the things that sociologists tell us is that oftentimes our thinking is shaped by the people around us or the attitudes around us, and oftentimes just that pressure that is there with a popular view forces us as Christians to shut off our brains and say, well, they must be right because so many people think that. And so what happens then, we begin to look for what's most acceptable or what's most fashionable at the moment or what is most popular. And then all of a sudden we become prone to listening to what the experts say. And those supposed experts will tell us, they'll be glad to tell us what to think and how to think. And we feel like, well, we're obligated because they're the experts. And at that point, further thinking stops. Well, instead of real thought, what happens then is we are satisfied with what everyone else thinks. And we cease to seek any further since we've been pressured into what some have called a groupthink. And groupthink is very dangerous because it's not really thinking at all. It's just looking at how many people have their hands raised, taking a vote and saying, yeah, that's how I think too. That's dangerous. And we end up hurting ourselves. We hurt our society. We hurt our culture because we don't really look for the deep answers that really address the problems that are staring us in the face. Now, one of the things that occurs then is we begin to measure truth by, if we're on the internet, we measure it by likes, friends, followers, or a thumbs up. And if it's a thumbs down, we're crushed because they don't like us. And so we pull back from the truth. Well, we have to be careful of that because the subtle and sometimes not so subtle cultural pressure forces us into a popular mold. And we kind of think, well, I've got to be politically correct. I don't dare say anything that would be questionable or that would make someone actually think themselves. And everything kind of grinds to a halt. The Apostle John warns us of looking at the world and seeking their approval. And, if that's our goal, we will begin to measure truth by that approval. Now, here's what John says in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15. He says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Now, that says that we have to be careful of these social pressures that will stop the whole process of thinking. And instead, as Christians, we're to be serious about loving God, loving His truth, and pleasing Him. And that's a different task. If our desire is to please the world, we will be tempted to compromise our thinking and conform it to all the patterns that we see around us and try to impress people with maybe how woke we are or socially conscious or whatever else there is out there. And in Romans 12:2, the Apostle Paul says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. He goes on in that same verse, he says, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now that means we're expected to think in new categories that is outside of the categories of the world. So that means that Christian thinking may not always or inevitably reflect the views of the world around us. They may not always be popular, but that doesn't mean we should be shamed into silence by the world or that we should apologize for not thinking like the rest of the world. Now, if the world is limited to an earthly perspective, then it's no surprise that we might sound a little different from the rest of the world, and that's okay. are seeing things from a perspective of revelation. We are seeing things from a heavenly perspective of saying we have received revelation from God that tells us how life works here. And that changes the way we see life. So Christians, don't seek to impress the world, to be accepted by them, but instead seek to impress God, who has created you, and let your mind reflect his mind. You know, Paul also says there at the end of Romans 12:2, he says, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And that means we got to think a little differently from the rest of the world. So start thinking clearly. Don't seek social approval, but instead seek God's approval. And you'll be amazed at the transformation in your thought life. May God bless you with good thinking on a good day. Have a great one now. Bye-bye. God bless.